Hi, welcome to Unspoken History. My name is Keisha. Thank you for joining me today. I am going to finish chapter 4 in American Negro Slave Revolts. I'm going to read a little bit from the last video just to bring us into what this chapter is talking about. The probability that radicalism current during the American Revolution played a part in provoking slave plots during that period has already been noted. So they know that the American Revolution caused some of the radicalism. Certainly, however, the event of a revolutionary nature that had more effect than any other in producing slave unrest within the present borders of the United States was the tremendous rebellion and the prolonged struggle of the Negroes of San Domingo, beginning in the summer of 1791. Concerning this influence, there is very considerable evidence. Okay. A white man of Richmond, Virginia, who filed a deposition in connection with plots in his state in 1793, reported that he overheard while spying on a group of Negroes. He declared that the one who seemed to be the chief speaker said, "You see how the blacks has killed the whites in the French island and took it a while ago?" On November 25th of this year, the commanding officer of the militia in Warwick County, Virginia, appealed to the governor for additional supply of arms and explained his plea by remarking that since the melancholy affair at Hispaniola, the inhabitants of the lower country, and especially this county, have been repeatedly alarmed by some of their slaves having attempted to raise insurrection, which was timely suppressed in this county by executing one of the advisors of the principal advisors of the insurrection. At times, slaves brought from the French island by refugees were themselves directly implicated in the trouble, so they blamed it on the French Negroes. This was intimated in a news item from South Carolina in 1793, not 1973. They wrote from Charleston, South Carolina, that the Negroes have become very insolent, insomuch that the citizens are alarmed, and the militia keep a constant guard. It is said that the St. Domingo Negroes have sown their seeds of revolt, and that a magazine has been attempted to be broken open. So, the whole idea of this book is to show that slaves were revolting constantly. Constantly. It wasn't like nice little prairie life like we see in the movies, with everybody sitting on the porch drinking lemonade and the slaves just out there working in the field, enjoying life. No, that's not quite what it was. It was like a constant war. If you have to constantly be sending militiamen from this state to this state, from that county to this county, to suppress a slave rebellion, then that means that you were in a constant state of war at some point, somewhere in the United States, all the time. It says similar sentiments were voiced from the same city a few years later. Serious and recurrent fires disturbed Charleston in the spring of 1796. Arson was suspected. A group of plunderers was seized as incendiaries. An inhabitant, however, wrote, June 19, 1796, fresh alarms of a similar nature so often repeated on the next day gave a very serious cast to the countenance of the citizens. Yet though it was clear enough that in every instance it was designed that there was silence observed respecting it which I could not account for. So people seemed afraid, or they were, so they would whisper, "Did you hear about that?" They didn't want to, voice it out loud. It said people seemed afraid to inquire into it. Some would whisper their opinions that the Negroes of the place were the authors. Others that the French Negroes were, and that they certainly intended to make Santo Domingo the business of it. So they intended to blame Santo Domingo's uprising on what was going on here in America, in the United States. No further told of the unrest and confession of some Negroes who implicated whites as Confederates. In November 1797, 3 slaves were executed and 2 banished for conspiring to burn the city. And early in 1798, a conspiracy of several French Negroes to fire the city and to act here as they had formerly done in Saint Domingo was discovered. In one of the numerous mob attacks against Negroes that have intermittently disgraced the United States, that in Philadelphia in 1804, the embattled black folks rallied in the struggle under the shout of "Show them San Domingo." So they were shouting, "Show us San Domingo," I guess. I don't know. At least one of the leaders in the uprising at St. Charles and St. John, the Baptist parish in Louisiana in January 1811, was declared to be a free mulatto from St. Domingo, named Charles Deslandis, something like that, and employed as a driver on a plantation of Major Andre. Sorry. His name was Charles Deslandis, and employed as a driver on a plantation of Mayor Andre, where the rebellion commenced. Okay, so he escaped from the plantation with anyway, there was an uprising and this person got away. Certain of the slaves involved in the Versey conspiracy in South Carolina in 1822 counted upon aid from San Domingo, and unique in the history of the American slave revolts to this writer's knowledge from Africa in maintaining control. So let me read that again. Certain of the slaves involved in the Versey conspiracy in South Carolina of 1822 counted upon aid from San Domingo in maintaining control after an initial success in an uprising. Moreover, Versey himself is reported to have written 2 letters to an unnamed individual in San Domingo in connection with his plans, but their contents were not disclosed. In December 1829, slaves aboard the Lafayette, bound for sale at New Orleans from Norfolk, revolted. Now just think about it. They're moving you in a boat from New York to New Orleans. Like you going somewhere else to be sold just right here in America. I don't know. It's just crazy to me. But anyway, because I thought they was coming from Africa. All right, so it says, in December 1829, slaves aboard the Lafayette bound for sale in New Orleans from Norfolk revolted with the intention of regaining their liberty and making their escape to St. Domingo. Now it keeps going from St. Domingo to San Domingo, so I'm assuming it's the same thing, San Domingo or St. Domingo. Escaped to St. Domingo with the schooner. They stated that a similar effort was to be made on board the SCHR. It's the name of a boat, SCHR. Transport from the same place, some of the mutineers were severely wounded. They were, after considerable difficulty, subdued, and 25 of them were bolted down to the deck until the arrival of the vessel at New Orleans. Another and final piece of evidence of the influence of San Domingo exerted upon American slaves appears in the course of correspondence between Louisiana planters and officials in Washington directly. It was directly after the Turner Rebellion in Virginia, late in September or early October 1831. A Mr. Nathan Morse had written to the president at the request of a number of planters and inhabitants of Louisiana on the subject of their exposed situation, having reference to the insurrectionary disposition of the colored people. The commanding officer of the United States Army, Major General Alexander McComb, replied, in consequence of the representation made to the president by the governor of Louisiana, setting forth apprehensions of the authorities and citizens of New Orleans as to the disposition of the colored population of that city and along the coast to rise upon the white inhabitants, and also that information had been received that the colored people in the islands had a correspondence with the blacks of Louisiana, tending to further their insurrectionary disposition. The Secretary of War addresses a letter to the governor in reply, informing him that the major that the major general commanding that the major general commanding the army would be directed to take measures for complying with the wishes of the governor. I lost no time in communicating to the officer commanding the troops at Baton Rouge to call to his aid any of the troops in the vicinity or on the Arkansas or Red Rivers. 2 companies of infantry, according to the request of the governor, are now stationed in the city. Arms are provided for the militia. Constant war. That sounds like there's a small war going on down there in Louisiana. There's another one over there in Virginia. We got one going on in Tennessee. Got to send the militia, send the militia. As to the means proper to adopt, As to the means proper to adopt in case of necessity, it is believed that the troops at Baton Rouge are competent to all of the purposes of suppressing any attempts of the blacks. The troops, in case of need, from the Red and Arkansas rivers, places at his disposal ample means under any contingency, for reasons which will naturally suggest themselves to you. It is desirable that the information here given may not find its way to the public prints, but there is no objection to its being imparted to those interested for their satisfaction. So we're not going to tell the public. How are they keeping this a secret? I don't know. Crafty, crafty. In noting evidence of the influence of the servile rebellion, I think I might know. Anyway, you ignore the voices of the people that you pretend are not people, and you only listen to your people. Well, they've been lying to you. In noting evidence of the influence of the servile rebellions in the West Indies upon American slaves, one is not to overlook the fact that the local plots and uprisings were themselves contagious. It is exceedingly difficult, however, to put one's finger on the specific proof of this connection. Nevertheless, as will be seen, the revolts tended to occur in bunches or periods, and it is believed that reasons for this are the infectious quality of disaffection. The great excitement is discovery. Hold on, let me read that again. It is believed that reasons for this are the infectious quality of disaffection. The great excitement its discovery occasions, the dislocation and turmoil its suppression meant, and the further acts of restrictions and repression that invariably followed. The French Revolution itself, the philosophy it is expounded, and particularly the bitter partisanship and widespread discussion it developed on this continent, were influential in arousing ideas of rebellion among the slaves. The Marseillaise and Ka'ara were sung. Newspapers were filled. Sorry, this was a song. Marcellus, and Ka'ira were sung. Newspapers were filled with reprints of revolutionary decrees, passionate with paeans to liberty, and these are some funny words, truculent and denunciations of tyranny. And prominent Southerners addressed each other as Citizen Taylor or Citizen Randolph. The French envoy Genet, starting his tour of the United States from Charleston, was given a hero's welcome, and that city's Democratic Club was recognized by the Jacobin Club of Paris as an affiliate branch. I was reading in one of the other ones, I think it was at the beginning of the first chapter of this, and somebody in there said, they're like the Jacobins to us. And I thought, what's a Jacobin? Well, I think I'm going to look it up now because it's in here again. The same city's council, moreover, decided that His Honor and Esquire were aristocratic titles which should no longer mar its journal, and the countryside in the South, as elsewhere, was often ablaze with the burning effigies of anti-revolutionists like Fisher Ames, and William L. Smith, and William Pitt and Benedict Arnold, added for good measure. In Spanish Louisiana, the turmoil was great, and the fever of the French Revolution stirred up sedition among the numerous French creoles and insubordination among slaves. When in 1793 Spain declared upon France only severe measures of repression directed against both the white and Negro population prevented revolution. When in 1793 Spain declared, I'm reading it again, war upon France, only severe measures of repression directed against both the white and the Negro population prevented revolution. So because they was treating everybody the same. That the slaves in the United States itself were also aware of the implication of the French event appeared in the fact that those involved in the Gabriel conspiracy of 1800 in Virginia had intended not to harm Frenchmen. The slaves, moreover, knew of the strained relations between the United States and France, particularly from 1797 to 1799. And this led them to hope for assistance from France once their own rebellion was well underway. Indeed, two white Frenchmen, never named, were declared to be directly implicated in the information of the plot. In addition to Frenchmen, the slaves involved in the Gabriel plot had planned to exempt Methodists and Quakers from harm. The former group had moreover been declared to be the real instigator of the plot rather than the French. Both these groups became of their own equalitarian and emancipationist learning had aroused considerable fear and hostility among slaveholders. The Methodist Church in particular was felt to be dangerous, for it had grown mightily in the generation following the American Revolution and was predominantly Southern, especially strong in Virginia and North Carolina, and to a considerable extent Negro, so that in 1796 about 20% of all Methodists were Negroes. Complaint that Methodists instilled dangerous notions of equality and liberty in the minds of slaves were frequent, and at times too came concrete charges that they actively developed insubordination, as for example in a letter from the sheriff of Culpeper County, Virginia, to the governor, dated September 5th, 1789. The writer declared that while the duty of the patrols was to break up meetings of slaves, they had found its performance actively and even forcibly hindered by groups of Methodists. Go Methodists! These people are determined to encourage our Negroes to wrong, and the other day they sent to the captain of the petty-rollers that on Friday night they would have a meeting if they came there and offered to touch a Negro, that they would protect the Negroes. If they said a word, beat them. Wow. Hold on, let me read that again. It said, these people, talking about the Methodists, are determined to encourage, I don't know what that word is, it looks like encourage, our Negroes to wrong. And the other day they sent to the captain of the petty-rollers that on Friday night they would have a meeting, and if they came there and offered to touch a Negro, that they would protect the Negro. If they said a word, would beat them. Quakers, too, were the objects of bitter attacks. Thus, in May 1796, the grand jury of Chowan County in northeastern North Carolina presented that the county is reduced to a situation of great peril and danger in consequence of the proceedings of the Quakers. The proceedings of the Quakers. Minds of the slaves are not only greatly corrupted and alienated from the service of their masters, but runaways are protected. Arsons are committed without a possibility of discovery. It went on to remark that while the growth of anti-slavery feelings in the North and the West Indies rebellion were also disturbing, still the Quakers and their abettors, the authors of the common mischief in this quarter of the state, resolute measure of repression were needed in order to prevent the common appeal to arms and their own defense, which at present appeared to be almost, if not altogether, necessary. The Quakers replied by declaring that unrest was inherent in the existence of slavery. So you got unrest because you have slavery. And if you want to get rid of the unrest, get rid of the slavery. It says the existence of slavery and not their creation, and concluded by urging more lenient manumission laws. Because they made it hard to free yourself. With the thorough commercialization of slavery, however, it is strengthening grip upon the South, largely due to Whitney and Boer's inventions in cotton and sugar, the Industrial Revolution and the annexation of Louisiana Territory, and the intense fear caused by many plots that occurred from about 1791 to 1802, and the restrictive measures that these fostered. Both groups made adjustments. The Quakers solved the problem of their philosophy's inconsistency with their surrounding social order very largely by moving away from that order. The few remaining intended to play down or repudiate anti-slavery background, while the Methodists solved some same problems by modifying and changing their attitude and regulations as concerns slavery. The progressive and revolutionary movement, however, which more than any other was considered responsible for the creation of organized expression of discontent as the part of the slaves, was that which had at its aim the abolition of the practice of human enslavement itself. It is simple to find any number of statements imitating or boldly affirming that the abolitionists were responsible for slave unrest generally, or for some specific plot, but it is far from simple to find substantiations for these assertions. So basically, to me, they're trying to blame the slave unrest on the Quakers and the Methodists because they helped them to get free sometimes, protected them and whatnot. The slaves were already doing it. They just saw this atrocity happen and thought, I feel compelled to help. I got to do something. That light bothers me. I'll be looking at the light instead of at the camera. All right. The fashionable viewpoint of the slaveocracy was expressed in the Senate of the United States on January 10, 1861, by Jefferson Davis, declaring that he found the speculations as to whether our servants would rebel or not exceedingly offensive. He went on to assert, governments have tampered with slaves, bad men have gone among the ignorant and credulous people and incited them to murder and arson. But of themselves, moving by themselves, I say history does not chronicle a case of a Negro insurrection. Okay, Jefferson Davis of 1861, he wasn't there 250 years ago when they were insurrecting and nobody wrote about it. They would just whisper about it. They didn't put it in no newspapers. They put it in private letters to each other. Okay, Mr. Davis, declaring that he found the speculations as to whether our servants would rebel or not exceedingly offensive. Our servants don't rebel. He went on to assert, governments have tampered with slaves, bad men have gone among the ignorant and credulous people and incited them to murder and arson. But of themselves, moving by themselves, I say history does not chronicle a case of Negro insurrection. Moving right along. Several years earlier, a committee of the Senate of South Carolina had similarly remarked in connection with the Negro. They're going to say the same thing. The animal predominating largely over the intellectual being, he has no aspiration for liberty and would never dream of revolt or of elevating his social status, but for the machination of those, basically just for the progress of those professing themselves his friends, are in fact his worst enemies. Okay, hold on. So he wouldn't even think about trying to get liberty. Never would he try to revolt. He's not intelligent enough for that. It's only but for the machination or for the creation of someone else, of those who professing themselves to be his friends are in fact his worst enemies. Unfortunately for him, these machinations have been, in some instances, to a certain extent, successful. A leading authority on the history of the American Negro, Carter G. Woodson, while making by no means so sweeping a statement as Jefferson Davis, does say that beginning about 1830, when intelligent Negroes made so many attempts to organize servile insurrections, they were encouraged by abolitionists. Specific insurrections and plots were often directly ascribed to the same source. Thus, one writer asserts that Denmark Vesey and some of his comrades in conspiracy had visited the North and been infected by the propaganda of the abolitionists. Any number of contemporary and later commenters on the Turner Rebellion have maintained that abolitionist propaganda was responsible for its occurrence. This was the opinion of the Virginia Governor John Floyd, which he expressed briefly in his message to the legislature on December 6, 1831, and in detail in a letter to the governor of South Carolina. Here it appears that when Floyd accused abolitionists in his legislative message, he was using the word in a very broad sense to include all people who definitely oppose slavery and desires its speedy demise, and not especially followers of any particular school of anti-slavery thought. Governor Floyd wrote, I will notice this affair in my annual message, but shall only give a few careless history of it as it appears to the public. So I'm not going to tell them about anything, okay? This is our secret. I am fully persuaded the spirit of insubordination, which has and still manifests itself in Virginia, had its origin among intimated from the Yankee population upon their first arrival among us, but most especially the Yankee peddlers and traders. So it's always somebody else's fault. Absolutely, it was not the Negro don't even have enough brain or whatever they thought at the time to rebel. So it had to be somebody else. It was those people from the North. It was those San Domingo Negroes. It was those French Negroes. It was those, because it just couldn't be the Negroes, right? Okay. The course has been by no means a direct one. They began first by making them religious. Their conversations were of that character, telling the blacks God was no respecter of persons, and that is correct. Sorry, I was looking at the light again. The black man was as good as the white, that all men were born free and equal. They could not serve two masters, and that the white people rebelled against England to obtain freedom. So have the blacks a right to do? Sorry, that didn't sound right. Let me read it again. It says, God was no respecter of persons, that the black man was as good as the white, that all men were born free and equal. They cannot serve two masters. The white people rebelled against England to obtain freedom. So have the blacks the right to do. He added that local white ministers and religious ladies taught the Negroes how to read so that the Bible's wonders might be open to them. But the slaves, he asserted, read the production of David Walker and William Lloyd Garrison as well, and this together with the urging of the Negro preachers produced the Turner Rebellion. Mrs. Lawrence Lewis, a niece of George Washington, in a letter dated Alexandria, Virginia, October 17, 1831, told her friends, Harrison Gray Otis, the mayor of Boston, that to the editor of The Liberator we owe in the greatest measure this calamity. Again, Gilmore Simms, in reviewing a book by Harriet Martineau, indicated his belief that actual underground organizational and agitational work on the part of the abolitionists caused the uprising. He quoted in part that he quoted in part and not quite correctly a statement by Miss Martineau to the effect that the revolt happened because the abolition movement began. Objected to this and Martineau to the effect that the revolt happened before the abolitionist movement began, objected to this and declared, "Our author confounds cause with effect. She should have said that the Southampton insurrection broke out before the secret workings of the abolitionists had been generally detected or suspected." So, one person want to write this about what happened, another person want to write that about what happened, and newspapers had opinions. But these people made sure that the truth stayed out those papers. Albert Bushnell Hart felt that Walker's pamphlet may possibly have influenced Turner. This very guarded statement is cited by Hilary Herbert to substantiate his definite and unqualified assertion that Northern agitators were responsible for the revolt. It is possible that Professor Hart made his statement on the basis of the opinion of Benjamin Lundy, who believed that Nat Turner had probably seen the pamphlet and thought it probable that the conspiracy were instigated chiefly by the aforementioned pamphlet of David Walker. If in fact they owed their origins to any publication whatever, several later writers have adopted the attitude of Herbert. Others, fewer, deny that these is discernible any causative connection between this agitation and the outbreak of the revolt. First in this group is William Lloyd Garrison himself, who persistently and faithfully denies having advised the Negroes to use force and declared, "We have not single white or black subscriber south of the Potomac. We have not a single white or black subscriber south of the Potomac." As James Ford Rose aptly put in, the assertion that slavery is a damning crime is one thing. The actual incitement of slaves to insurrection is another. One may, of course, safely say that Walker's pamphlet possibly influenced Turner. It is also possible that some work on Napoleon influenced him, and he decided that I was ordained for some great purpose in the hands of the Almighty. That's what Turner said. There is as much evidence for the one as for the other. The fact is that never has there been presented an iota of clear evidence going to show a causal relation between anti-slavery literature and Turner's actions. So basically, they're saying that the pamphlets and what people were writing about other rebellions or other uprisings going on is not what caused. It wasn't the abolitionist movement that caused Turner to rebel, or any of the rebellions. Of course, I'm sure it sparked some, of course, because fire, that's what fire does. You got fire burning inside you about something real passionate about it. Other people can feel it and get sparked too. Okay. It says there is as much evidence for the one as for the other. The fact is that never has there been presented an iota of clear evidence going to show a causal relationship between anti-slavery literature and Turner's actions. Both were, of course, characteristic of the spirit of the times and possessed a kinship in origin. Hatred of slavery, but no other relationship has been demonstrated. A somewhat similar state of affairs prevailed concerning the widespread conspiracies of 1835. Southern newspapers and letter writers were free and easy with generalized accusations hurled against the abolitionists as the originators and prime movers of the trouble. So basically, the papers blamed it on the abolitionists. It's the abolitionists. They're causing a divide. They're causing a divide in our country. Those Negroes were just fine down there being slaves. It's the abolitionists' fault. In this case, the charge was dignified by being repeated by the President of the United States. Part of Andrew Jackson's 7th annual message reads as follows. I must also invite your attention to the painful excitement produced in the South by attempts to circulate through the mail inflammatory appeals addressed to the passion of the slaves, in prints and in various sorts of publications, calculated to stimulate their insurrection and to produce all horrors of servile war. It is fortunate for the country that the good sense, the generous feelings, and the deep-rooted attachment of the people of the non-slaveholding states to the Union and to their fellow citizens of the same blood in the South have given so strong and impressive a tone to the sentiments entertained against the proceedings of misguided persons who have engaged in these unconstitutional and wicked attempts, and especially again the emissaries from foreign parts who have dared to interfere in this matter as to authorize the hope that those attempts will no longer be persisted in. So, who was this talking? This is somebody. Attention, inflammatory. Who is it? Hold on. The president, Andrew Jackson. All right. So basically, he's saying, they shouldn't be stirring these people up and cause division and servile war and, and all that. It's just unfortunate. It's unfortunate for our country. Anyway, these contemporary charges have been reiterated by some later writers, but again, it must be stated that while it is clear whites were involved in these 1835 plots, no proof, indeed, no good evidence is known to exist tying up the abolitionist movement or any bona fide member of that movement with those conspiracies. So they don't have evidence to tie anything to it, just that they spoke out against slavery, not necessarily that they had to actually help them with their insurrections because they spoke out against it. All right? It is to the point to note that the governor of Mississippi himself, in his proclamation calling upon all citizens and state officers to aid in suppressing insurrectionary movements disturbing the state, did not refer to the suspected whites as abolitionists. Rather, he called them lawless-based, villainous white men. Lawless-based, villainous white men. The abolitionists themselves denied any part of the plot. The remarks of Angelina Gimmick, made in her famous appeal to the Christian women of the South, may be referred to as an apt summary of their views. She declared that she knew the material mailed to prominent white people in the South by the American Anti-Slavery Society contained no appeal to the slaves. It contained no appeal to the slaves to rebel. Moreover, with regard to those white men who, it was said, did try to raise an insurrection in Mississippi a year ago and who were stated to be abolitionists, none of them were ever proved to be a member of anti-slavery societies. So they called them abolitionists, but they weren't a part of no movement. And it must remain a matter of great doubt whether even they were guilty of the crime alleged against them, because when any community is thrown into such a panic as to inflict lynch law upon accused persons, they cannot be supposed to be capable of judging with calmness and impartiality. So once they done got worked up, give us Barabbas, they'll kill the innocent man and take the murderer off and set him free. The paragraph is an admirable epitome of the evidence concerning this subject. Later outbreaks were also specifically attributed to the direct interference of abolitionists. This was true especially of the vast disturbances of 1865 and 1860. Sorry, that's 1856 and 1860. That was kind of a dyslexic. Anyway, in September 1856, northern incendiaries were blamed for unrest in Clark County, Mississippi, and in Elba, Florida. In both places, the accused were forced to flee for their lives. Later this year, a man described as an Ohio abolitionist named Davison was declared to be implicated in the servile plot in Lavaca County, Texas, and suffered 100 lashes. A Southern newspaper editorializing early in 1857 when the unrest appeared to have passed its peak, felt that the phenomenon was due to miscegenation, machination. I want to say it's machination of Southern seducers, while the British consul in Richmond, a popular novelist, G.P.R. James, believed the wide diffusion of the disorder and the implication of whites indicated the movement had been planned in the North. As a final instance of this viewpoint, may be mentioned a letter from Charles Dimmock, superintendent of the Richmond Armory, to the governor of Virginia. He made a considerable length suggestion for strengthening the military powers of the state, using the military to keep people in slavery. Now, I keep hearing people say slavery was a choice. Yeah, be a slave or die. That was a choice. It was. But it's the kind of choice that people out here trying to say, like, you know, I ain't gonna even mention their names, but slavery was a choice. Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, it was. They could have died. That was the other option. All right. It said he made a considerable suggestion for strengthening the military prowess of the state and asked pardon for this seeming officiousness on the ground of the great dangers arising from the slave population. His concern was heightened, said the official, when I regard the hellish design of those who are working upon the passions and ignorances of our slaves, stimulating them to deeds of horror, abortive as they must be for good to any. The year 1860 almost exactly paralleled, as concerns troubled with slaves, that of 1856, and once again abolitionists were held largely responsible. Yet here, as before, the investigator... So, if you say that the slaves are unsatisfied, oh my God, they're unsatisfied, they're rebelling, then what? You got to stop slavery? So you're saying that the slavery went on for so long because you thought they liked it? That they were happy? No. No, nobody could have thought that. Nobody really thought that, really? The year 1860 almost exactly paralleled as concerns trouble with slaves that of 1856, and once again abolitionists were largely responsible. Yet there, as before, the investigator is forced to conclude that the evidence of this complicity or of the character and political or philosophical affiliation of the whites involved are far from satisfactory. Again, many southern publications rang with the similar charges against northern incendiaries and abolitionists, and particularly favored by the politicians, Black Republicans. Black Republicans in the 1850s. The latter are well exemplified by the remarks of the influential senator from Texas, Louis T. Wigfall, declaring, Abraham Lincoln himself was a professional abolitionist, organizer, and agitator. The senator went on to warn, we say to those states, you shall not permit men to go there and excite your citizens to make John Brown's raid or bring fire and strychnine within the limits of the state to which I owe my allegiance. You shall not publish newspapers and pamphlets to excite our slaves to insurrection. We will have peace. This sounds delusional to me. You know there's no peace. Y'all writing letters back and forth to each other, talking about slave insurrections and uprisings all over the place. You know there's no peace. So if you're saying if you keep on telling everybody that slaves are docile, that slaves will become docile? Only that people will start to believe that slaves were docile. That did not make them docile. Okay. It says, the latter, the Black Republicans, are well exemplified by the remarks of the influential senator from Texas, Louis T. Wigfall, declaring that Abraham Lincoln himself was a professional abolitionist, organizer, and agitator. The senator went on to warn, we say to those states that you shall not permit men to go there and excite your citizens to make John Brown's raid or bring fire and strychnine within the limits of the states to which I owe my allegiance. You shall not publish newspapers and pamphlets to excite our slaves to insurrection. We will have peace or withdraw from the Union. Becoming more specific in his charges, but unfortunately not in his proof. The senator told of the many towns and cities that said he had been destroyed by slave-created fires and quantities of poison found among the Negroes. And then in the most interesting passage stated, an association called the Mystic Red was entered into by members of the Methodist Church North. The Mystic Red, I have to check that out. Entered into by members of the Methodist Church North and the John Brown men, and their purpose was to carry out the irrepressible conflict to burn our town, burn our stores, our merchants, burn our mills, to bring free oil northern capital in, and thus get possession of Texas. Once again, the implicated organization denied the truth of these accusations. One who personally and whose party generally had been and was again to be accused, while not denying to dignify the I don't know what that word is. DEIGNING, to dignify the charges against himself by noting them, did as the leader of the Republican Party disavowed any connection between that organization and slave conspiracies, and denied that it desired to see the forming of the maturing of such conspiracies. So, of course, we're not going to say we did it, because there was some crazy people in America. Okay? They will lynch you. They don't care. You're messing with their fib. Okay? So, thank you for watching. I will read some more of this book another time. Like and share and subscribe. And I'll see you next video. Have a good day. Thank you. Bye-bye.